There was a boy who sat in the last row of every classroom he had ever been in. Not because he was told to sit there. Not because it was assigned, he chose it. The back corner near the window where teachers rarely looked and students rarely noticed him. His name doesn't matter for now. What matters is that he was 12 years old, in 7th grade, and he had mastered the art of being invisible. Every morning he walked into Jefferson Middle School in Columbus, Ohio, with his head down and his backpack hanging low on his shoulders. He didn't talk to anyone in the hallways. He didn't eat lunch with friends because he didn't have any. During class, he never raised his hand. When teachers called on him, which was rare, he answered in a voice so quiet that they usually just moved on to someone else. Most people thought he was shy. Some thought he was slow. A few teachers had written notes in his file suggesting he might have a learning disability. But no one really knew what was going on inside his head. And honestly, no one tried very hard to find out. His mother worked 2 jobs. She was a nurse at a hospital downtown, pulling double shifts more often than not. She loved her son deeply, but by the time she got home each night, she was so tired she could barely keep her eyes open. She trusted that the school would tell her if something was wrong. And since no one ever called with bad news, she assumed everything was fine. It wasn't fine. But it wasn't bad in the way people might think. The boy was bored. Desperately, painfully bored. He had figured out basic algebra when he was 8 years old, teaching himself from a math book he found at a garage sale. By the time he was 10, he had moved on to geometry, then trigonometry, then calculus. He spent hours at the public library, reading books that college students struggled with. He watched free lectures online, pausing and rewinding until he understood every concept. Math made sense to him in a way nothing else did. Numbers followed rules. Equations had solutions. There was a beauty in it, a logic that felt like coming home. But school math? School math was torture, sitting in class while the teacher explained. How to solve for X felt like being asked to tie his shoes over and over again. He already knew the answer before she finished writing the problem. He knew 10 different ways to solve it. He knew shortcuts that weren't in the textbook, so he stopped paying attention. He stopped doing homework because it felt pointless. He stopped trying on tests because he didn't care about grades. Instead, he filled his notebook with his own problems, equations that challenged him, proofs that kept his mind busy while the rest of the class learned the things he had mastered years ago. His math teacher that year was a woman named Mrs. Holloway. She was 54 years old and had been teaching at Jefferson Middle School for 23 years. She was good at her job. She genuinely cared about her students. She had a reputation for being tough but fair, the kind of teacher who pushed kids to do their best. But even good teachers have blind spots. Mrs. Holloway noticed the boy in the back corner, of course. It was hard not to notice someone who never participated. She checked his homework and saw that it was often incomplete or blank. She looked at his test scores and saw C minuses, sometimes D pluses. She tried to talk to him a few times, but he just shrugged and mumbled one-word answers. She wrote him off. Not cruelly, not intentionally, but she did. She had 32 students in her class, and most of them needed help. The boy in the back didn't seem to want help. He didn't seem to want anything. So she focused her energy on the kids who raised their hands, who asked questions, who showed up after school for extra tutoring. The boy noticed. He always noticed, but he didn't blame her. He had learned a long time ago that being invisible was easier than being seen. When you're seen, people expect things from you. They ask questions, they make assumptions. And when you don't fit into their boxes, they get frustrated or confused, or worst of all, they try to fix you. He didn't want to be fixed. He just wanted to be left alone. But that changed on a Thursday afternoon in the middle of October. The class was learning about linear equations. Mrs. Holloway was explaining how to graph a line using slope-intercept form. It was basic stuff, the kind of lesson she had taught hundreds of times. Most of the students were following along, taking notes, asking the occasional question. The boy in the back was staring out the window. His notebook was open on his desk, but instead of taking notes, he was working on something else entirely. Something involving prime numbers and a pattern he had been trying to crack for weeks. Mrs. Holloway noticed. She had been watching him more closely lately, frustrated by his lack of engagement. She didn't understand how someone could sit in her class day after day and not even pretend to pay attention. It felt disrespectful. It felt like he was silently telling her that she had nothing to offer him. She made a decision. Maybe it was the wrong one. Later, she would replay this moment in her mind thousands of times, wishing she had handled it differently. But in that moment, standing at the front of the classroom with chalk dust on her fingers, she just wanted to get through to him. She called his name. He looked up, startled. A few students turned around to stare at him. She asked him to come to the board and solve the problem she had just written. It was simple. Find the slope and y-intercept, then graph the line. Any student who had been paying attention could do it in 30 seconds. He walked slowly to the front of the room. She handed him the chalk. He stared at the equation on the board. He knew the answer. Of course he knew the answer. He could have solved it in his sleep. But something happened when he stood there, with everyone watching him. His mind went blank. Not because he didn't understand the math, but because he suddenly felt exposed. Visible. All those eyes on him, waiting for him to perform like some kind of circus animal. He couldn't do it. Seconds ticked by. 10 seconds, 20, 30, a minute. Some students started whispering. A few laughed nervously. Mrs. Holloway stood with her arms crossed, waiting. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was sharper than she intended. She said something about paying attention in class. She said something about how he couldn't expect to succeed if he didn't put in any effort. She told him to sit back down. He walked back to his seat. His face was burning. He didn't look at anyone. He just sat down, opened his notebook, and stared at the page without seeing it. Mrs. Holloway continued the lesson. She didn't think much of it. She had embarrassed students before when they weren't paying attention. It was a teaching technique, a way to show that there were consequences for checking out. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the notebook sitting on his desk contained mathematical proofs that would have impressed graduate students. The boy she had just humiliated in front of 32 seventh graders was quietly, secretly, working on problems that most adults couldn't begin to understand. He wasn't stupid. He wasn't lazy. He wasn't slow. He was a genius hiding in plain sight. And she had just made him feel smaller than he had ever felt before. That afternoon, when the bell rang and students rushed out, the boy left his notebook behind. He didn't realize it until he was halfway home. By then, it was too late to go back. And that forgotten notebook was about to change everything. Mrs. Holloway stayed late that Thursday evening. She often did. Grading papers, preparing lessons, answering emails from parents. The building grew quiet around her as other teachers packed up and went home to their families. She liked the silence. It helped her think. Around 6 o'clock, the janitor knocked on her open door. He was an older man, friendly. The kind of person who remembered everyone's name and asked about their kids. He held up a notebook. Plain black cover, edges worn soft from use. He asked if she knew whose it was. A student had left it behind in her classroom. She took it from him and flipped to the first page. There, in messy handwriting, was a name she recognized immediately. The quiet boy. The one from the back corner. The one she had called to the board just a few hours ago. She thanked the janitor and said she would make sure it got back to him. He nodded and continued down the hallway, pushing his cart of cleaning supplies. Mrs. Holloway set the notebook on her desk. She planned to just leave it there, return it to the boy tomorrow morning, and move on with her evening. But something made her pause. Curiosity, maybe, or guilt. She wasn't sure which. She thought about how he had frozen at the board, how his face had gone red, how he had walked back to his seat without saying a word. She had been hard on him. She knew that now. Maybe too hard. She opened the notebook. The first few pages were what she expected. Doodles in the margins. A few half-finished homework problems. Nothing interesting. She almost closed it and set it aside, but then she turned another page. And another. And suddenly she wasn't looking at 7th grade math anymore. The pages were filled with equations. Dense, complex, covering every inch of available space. She recognized some of it. Calculus, derivatives, and integrals. The kind of math she had studied in college, not the kind she taught to 12-year-olds. She kept flipping. The equations got more advanced. Number theory. Proofs involving prime numbers. Notations she hadn't seen in years. Some of it she didn't recognize at all. Her first thought was that he must have copied it from somewhere. The internet, maybe. A textbook. There was no way a seventh grader could understand this material, let alone produce it on his own, but as she looked more closely, she saw something that changed her mind. The work wasn't clean and polished like something copied from a book. It was messy, full of crossed-out attempts and scribbled corrections. There were notes in the margins, questions the boy had written to himself, moments where he had clearly gotten stuck and worked through the problem step by step until he found the answer. This wasn't copied. This was original thinking. This was a mind wrestling with ideas, making mistakes, learning, growing. Mrs. Holloway sat back in her chair. Her hands were trembling slightly. She thought about all the time she had looked at this boy and seen nothing. A quiet kid who didn't try? A student who didn't care? She had written him off months ago, filed him away in her mind as someone who just wasn't interested in learning, but here, in this worn notebook, was proof that she had been completely wrong. She stayed in her classroom until almost midnight that night. She couldn't stop reading. Page after page, she found herself drawn deeper into the boy's private world. A world of numbers and patterns and beautiful, complex logic that most people would never understand. There was one section that hit her the hardest. Near the back of the notebook, she found a series of proofs involving something called the Riemann hypothesis. She knew enough about advanced mathematics to recognize the name. It was one of the most famous unsolved problems in the entire field. Mathematicians had been working on it for over 100 years. The boy hadn't solved it, of course. That would have been impossible. But he was trying. He was genuinely, seriously trying to tackle one of the hardest problems in mathematics. And his attempts showed a level of understanding that most college students never achieved. He was 12 years old. Mrs. Holloway closed the notebook and sat in the dark classroom for a long time. The only light came from the parking lot outside. Filtering through the window, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Shame, deep, uncomfortable shame. She had humiliated this boy in front of his classmates. She had told him he wasn't trying hard enough. She had assumed that his silence and his poor grades meant he was lazy, or slow, or indifferent, but the truth was exactly the opposite. He wasn't failing because he didn't understand the material. He was failing because the material was so far beneath him that he couldn't bring himself to engage with it. He was bored, understimulated, trapped in a system that had no idea what to do with a mind like his. And instead of recognizing that she had punished him for it, Mrs. Holloway drove home that night with the notebook on the passenger seat beside her. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the boy's face when he walked back to his seat. The way he had stared at his desk, refusing to look at anyone. The way his shoulders had curled inward, like he was trying to make himself even smaller. She had done that to him. The next morning. She arrived at school an hour early. She sat at her desk with the notebook in front of her, trying to figure out what to do. She could just return it and pretend she had never looked inside. That would be the easy thing. The safe thing, but she couldn't do that. Not now. Not after what she had seen. She thought about her 23 years of teaching. All the students who had passed through her classroom. The ones she had helped. The ones she had inspired. The ones she had failed without realizing it. She wondered how many other kids like this boy had slipped through the cracks. How many quiet students had been hiding brilliance behind their silence, waiting for someone to notice. She had always believed she was good at her job. But maybe being good wasn't enough. Maybe you had to be great. Maybe you had to look harder, dig deeper. Refused to accept the obvious explanations. By the time the first bell rang, Mrs. Holloway had made a decision. She wasn't going to just return the notebook and move on. She was going to do something she should have done months ago. She was going to really see this boy. Not the version of him she had invented in her head. The real him. The one who filled notebooks with equations that graduate students would struggle to understand. The one who sat in the back corner not because he was hiding from learning, but because he was hiding from a world that had never given him a chance to show what he could do. She didn't know exactly how to help him yet. She didn't have a plan, but she knew the first step. She had to apologize. When the boy walked into her classroom that morning, he didn't look at her. He went straight to his seat in the back corner, same as always. He didn't know his notebook was missing yet. Or maybe he did know, and he was trying not to think about it. Mrs. Holloway watched him settle into his chair. She watched him pull out a different notebook, a newer one, and begin writing. Already working on something. Always working. She took a deep breath. Her heart was beating fast. After class, she would ask him to stay. She would show him the notebook. And then, for the first time since September, she would actually listen to what he had to say. It was terrifying. Admitting you were wrong always is. But sometimes, the most important thing a teacher can do is learn, and Mrs. Holloway was finally ready to be a student. The class ended at 2:15 that afternoon. Students grabbed their bags and rushed toward the door, eager to escape into the freedom of the hallway. The boy in the back corner was one of the first to stand up. He moved quickly, head down, already halfway to the exit. Mrs. Holloway called his name. He stopped. His whole body went stiff, like an animal sensing danger. A few students glanced back, curious, but most kept walking. Within seconds, the room was empty except for the two of them. She asked him to stay for a moment. Her voice was different than usual, softer, he noticed, but he didn't trust it. He walked slowly toward her desk. His eyes were fixed on the floor. He was already preparing himself for whatever punishment was coming. Maybe she was going to call his mother. Maybe she was going to send him to the principal's office. He had been through this before with other teachers. He knew the routine, but then he saw what was sitting on her desk. His notebook. The black one with the worn edges. The one he had been looking for all day. His stomach dropped. Mrs. Holloway saw the panic flash across his face. She understood immediately. He wasn't afraid of getting in trouble for leaving it behind. He was afraid because she had seen what was inside. She picked up the notebook and held it carefully, like it was something precious. Because it was, she told him she had found it last night. She told him she had looked through it. She watched his face as she spoke, saw the walls going up, the defenses locking into place. He was shutting down, preparing to deny everything, to explain it away, to go back to being invisible, but she didn't give him the chance. She apologized. The word hung in the air between them. He looked up for the first time, confused. Teachers didn't apologize to students. That wasn't how it worked. She apologized for what she had done to him yesterday. For calling him to the board. For embarrassing him in front of the class. For assuming that his silence meant he wasn't trying. She told him she had been wrong. Completely, totally wrong. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, frozen, like he was waiting for the trap to spring. So she kept talking. She told him what she had seen in his notebook. The calculus. The number theory. The attempts at problems that most adults had never even heard of. She told him she didn't fully understand all of it, but she understood enough to know that it was remarkable. She asked him where he had learned all of this. For a long moment, he was silent. She could see him struggling, fighting against years of habit. He had spent so long hiding, so long pretending to be ordinary. That opening up felt dangerous, impossible, but something in her voice, something in the way she was looking at him, made him take a chance. He started talking. It came out slowly at first. Just a few words, then more. Then a flood. He told her about the garage sale when he was 8. The math book he had bought for 50 cents. How he had taken it home and read it cover to cover in 3 days. How the numbers had clicked in his brain like puzzle pieces falling into place. He told her about the library. The hours he spent there after school, working through textbooks meant for high schoolers, then college students, then graduate students. He told her about the free lectures he found online, the ones from universities all over the world. How he would watch them late at night in his bedroom, keeping the volume low so he wouldn't wake his mother. He told her about his mother. How hard she worked. How tired she always was. How he didn't want to burden her with something she couldn't fix. She had enough to worry about: bills, rent, keeping food on the table. He couldn't add his problems to that list. He told her about school, how it felt like being trapped in slow motion, how sitting through lessons he had mastered years ago made him want to scream. But he had learned to stay quiet, to blend in. Because when you stand out, people notice. And when people notice, they expect things from you. They put you in boxes. They try to fix you. He told her about a teacher he had when he was 9. 3rd grade. He had solved a math problem too quickly, without showing his work, and the teacher had accused him of cheating, had yelled at him in front of the whole class, had called his mother and told her that her son was a liar. After that, he decided it was safer to hide, to pretend he was just like everyone else, to be invisible. Mrs. Holloway listened to all of it. She didn't interrupt. She didn't try to explain or defend or make excuses. She just listened. When he finished, the classroom was quiet. The afternoon sunlight was slanting through the windows, making long shadows across the floor. Somewhere in the building, a door slammed. Voices echoed in the hallway. But in this room, there was only silence. Mrs. Holloway took a deep breath. She told him she was sorry. Not just for yesterday, but for all of it. For every teacher who had failed to see him. For every adult who had made him feel like he had to hide. But she also told him something else. Something that made him lift his head and look at her directly for the first time. She told him that she wanted to help. She didn't know exactly how yet. She didn't have all the answers. But she knew people. Other teachers. Professors at the university. People who might be able to give him the challenge he deserved, the education he needed. She wanted to make some calls, open some doors, see what was possible, but only if he wanted her to. Only if he was willing to trust her. He was quiet for a long time. She could see the doubt in his eyes. The fear. He had been burned before. People had made promises to him before. Why should this time be any different? But there was something else in his eyes, too. Something that looked almost like hope. A tiny spark, buried deep, that had never quite gone out no matter how hard he tried to smother it. He asked her one question. Just one? Why did she care? Mrs. Holloway thought about it. She could have given him a simple answer. Because it was her job. Because he was her student. Because teachers were supposed to help kids. But that wasn't the real reason. The real reason was harder to explain. She told him the truth. She told him that she had been teaching for 23 years, and somewhere along the way, she had started to coast. To do the minimum. To focus on the students who were easy to reach and let the others slip by. She had forgotten why she became a teacher in the first place, but his notebook had reminded her. It had shown her that there were kids out there with incredible gifts, hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to notice. And she didn't want to be the kind of teacher who let those kids fall through the cracks. She wanted to be better. And helping him was a way to start. The boy looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. Okay, he said. He would trust her. But if she let him down, if this turned out to be another empty promise, he would go back to being invisible. And this time, no one would ever find him again. Mrs. Holloway understood. She reached out and handed him his notebook. She told him she wouldn't let him down, and for the first time in a very long time, he believed her. Mrs. Holloway made her first phone call that same evening. She sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside her, scrolling through old contacts on her phone. There was a name she hadn't thought about in years. A man she had known back in graduate school, before she decided to become a middle school teacher. Instead of pursuing her doctorate, his name was Dr. Foster. He was a mathematics professor at Ohio State University now, one of the most respected in his department. They had lost touch over the years, the way old friends often do. But she still had his number. She hesitated before pressing call. It had been so long. What if he didn't remember her? What if he thought she was wasting his time? But then she thought about the boy, the notebook, the promise she had made. She pressed call. He answered on the third ring. His voice was older but still familiar. She reminded him who she was, and after a moment of confusion, he laughed warmly. Of course he remembered her. They talked for a few minutes, catching up on the years that had passed. He asked about her teaching career. She asked about his research, then she told him why she was really calling. She explained everything. The quiet student in her class. The notebook filled with advanced mathematics. The proofs and equations that she barely understood. She told him she had never seen anything like it in 23 years of teaching. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Dr. Foster asked her to send him pictures of the notebook. She did. Right there at her kitchen table, she photographed page after page and sent them through. Then she waited. 10 minutes passed. 20. Her coffee was completely cold now, but she didn't notice. She just stared at her phone, waiting for a response. When it finally came, it was just 4 words. Where did you find this kid? The next few weeks moved faster than the boy could have imagined. Dr. Foster wanted to meet him. Mrs. Holloway arranged everything. She talked to the principal, who was skeptical at first but eventually agreed to let the boy miss a few afternoon classes for something called an educational opportunity. She drove him to the university herself. It was a 30-minute trip from the middle school, and they barely spoke during the drive. The boy sat in the passenger seat, clutching his notebook, staring out the window at the passing buildings. He looked terrified. Mrs. Holloway understood. This was everything he had been hiding from: attention, expectations, the possibility of disappointment, but she also saw something else in his eyes: excitement, a hunger that he couldn't quite suppress. For the first time in his life, someone was taking him seriously. Someone wanted to see what he could do. Dr. Foster met them in his office. It was small and cluttered, every surface covered with books and papers and coffee cups. He was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes behind thick glasses. He shook the boy's hand like he was meeting a colleague, not a 12-year-old. They talked for 3 hours. Mrs. Holloway sat in the corner and watched. She didn't understand most of what they discussed. The words flew over her head, technical terms and concepts that belonged to a world she had left behind decades ago. But she understood enough to see what was happening. The boy was coming alive. He was talking more than she had ever heard him talk. His voice was still quiet, but there was energy in it now. Passion. He was asking questions, challenging ideas, proposing solutions. Dr. Foster pushed back, argued with him, forced him to defend his thinking. And the boy rose to meet every challenge. By the end of the meeting, Dr. Foster made an offer. He wanted the boy to audit his undergraduate mathematics course twice a week, Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. He would arrange transportation and get permission from the school district. He would personally mentor the boy, guide him, help him develop his gifts. The boy looked at Mrs. Holloway. She nodded. He said yes. That was the beginning of everything. Within a month, the boy was attending university lectures with students twice his age. He sat in the front row, took detailed notes, and asked questions that made the other students turn and stare. Some of them laughed at first. A kid in a middle school backpack sitting in a college classroom. It seemed like a joke, but they stopped laughing quickly. Because this kid knew things they didn't. He saw patterns they missed. He solved problems they struggled with. Dr. Foster started giving him extra work, special assignments, problems that weren't in any textbook. The boy devoured them all. He stayed up late at night, working by flashlight so he wouldn't disturb his mother. He filled notebook after notebook with his ideas. And slowly, something else started to change. Something deeper. He started talking, not just about math, about everything. In Dr. Foster's seminars, where no one knew him as the quiet kid from the back of the classroom, he found his voice. He debated with graduate students. He presented his ideas to professors. He learned that being smart didn't have to mean being alone. Mrs. Holloway adjusted her own class to support him. She let him work independently on advanced material while the other students followed the regular curriculum. She checked in with him every day, not to grade him or test him, but just to talk, to make sure he was okay. One evening in December, she got a phone call from the boy's mother. The woman was crying. Not sad tears, grateful ones. She had finally learned what was happening. The university, the professor, the doors that were opening for her son. She had no idea any of it was possible. She had spent years worrying about him, thinking something was wrong. Blaming herself for not being around enough to help, she thanked Mrs. Holloway over and over. Through her tears, she thanked her. Mrs. Holloway told her the truth. She said she had almost missed him. That for months she had looked right past him, seen nothing, assumed the worst. She told her that the boy had been the one to teach her something. Not the other way around. The mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that Mrs. Holloway would never forget. She said that sometimes the people who change our lives don't get everything right. They make mistakes. They fail us in small ways. But what matters is what they do after. Whether they give up or keep trying. Mrs. Holloway had kept trying. And that made all the difference. By spring, the boy presented an original mathematical proof at a regional conference. He stood on a stage in front of 200 people, professors and researchers and graduate students from across the state. His voice shook at first. His hands trembled as he pointed to equations on the screen behind him, but he kept going. He explained his work step by step. He answered questions from people who had been studying mathematics for longer than he had been alive. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping. Then another person. Then the whole room. Mrs. Holloway sat in the back row, watching him stand in the spotlight. She remembered the day she had called him to the board. The frozen look on his face. The way he had walked back to his seat in shame. That boy was gone now. In his place stood someone who finally knew what he was capable of. Someone who had stopped hiding. She wiped her eyes and clapped harder than anyone. 5 years passed. The boy was not a boy anymore. He was 17 now, tall and thin, with the same quiet eyes but a different way of carrying himself. He walked with his head up. He looked people in the face when he spoke. He had learned that being seen was not something to fear. High school graduation was on a warm Saturday afternoon in June. The ceremony was held in the football stadium. Rows of white chairs set up on the field, families crowding the bleachers with cameras and flowers. The sun was bright, and the air smelled like freshly cut grass. He sat with his classmates in alphabetical order, wearing the same cap and gown as everyone else. But his story was not like everyone else's. By the time he reached his senior year, he had already published 3 papers in academic journals. Real papers, peer-reviewed, cited by researchers around the world. He had been featured in news articles about young prodigies. Universities had started sending him letters when he was 15. He had chosen MIT, full scholarship. They had been recruiting him since his sophomore year, but today was not about MIT. Today was about something else. The valedictorian speech had been assigned to another student, a girl who had earned the highest GPA in the class. She gave a nice speech about hard work and following your dreams. People clapped politely. Then the principal returned to the microphone. He announced that another student had requested time to speak. It was unusual, but given the circumstances, the administration had agreed. He called the boy's name. A murmur went through the crowd. Everyone knew who he was by now. The math genius. The quiet kid who had turned out to be something extraordinary. He had been invisible for so long, but somewhere along the way, people had started to notice. He walked to the podium. His mother sat in the front row, wearing a new dress she had bought just for today. She was crying already, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Beside her sat an older woman with gray hair and a proud smile, Mrs. Holloway, retired now. But she wouldn't have missed this for anything. He adjusted the microphone. Looked out at the sea of faces. Took a breath. He said he wanted to talk about invisibility, not the superpower kind, he said. The real kind. The kind that happens when people look at you and see nothing. When they make assumptions based on your silence, your background, your circumstances. When they decide who you are before you ever get a chance to show them. He told them he had been invisible for most of his childhood. He sat in the back of classrooms, never raised his hand, never spoke unless forced to. Teachers thought he was slow. Classmates thought he was weird. His own mother, working 2 jobs just to keep them afloat, was too exhausted to see what was happening. He didn't blame any of them. Invisibility is easy to miss. That's the whole point, but then something changed. One teacher, in one moment, made a different choice. He told the story. Not all of it, but enough. The notebook left behind. The discovery. The apology that came after. He didn't use Mrs. Holloway's name, but everyone who knew the story understood. He talked about what it meant to be truly seen for the first time. How terrifying it was. How he had almost pushed her away, almost retreated back into his shell, almost chosen the safety of invisibility over the risk of being known. But she didn't let him. She kept showing up. She made phone calls, opened doors, fought battles he didn't even know about. She believed in him before he believed in himself. He paused. The stadium was completely silent. He said that most people who fail us quietly move on. They make mistakes, and instead of fixing them, they pretend it never happened. They protect their pride. They tell themselves it wasn't their fault. But sometimes, he said, someone does the opposite. They see their mistake clearly. They feel the weight of it. And instead of running away, they run toward it. They try to make it right. That kind of courage is rare. And it changes everything. He looked directly at Mrs. Holloway. He told her thank you. Not just for opening doors, but for teaching him something more important than any equation. She taught him that it's never too late to see someone. Never too late to change. Never too late to be the person you should have been all along. Mrs. Holloway was crying now. So was his mother? So were half the people in the stadium. He smiled. A real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. He said one more thing before he stepped away from the microphone. He said that he was going to spend the rest of his life trying to see the invisible people, the quiet ones, the ones that everyone else overlooks, because he knew what it felt like to be them. And he knew how much it mattered when someone finally looked. The applause started before he even finished his last sentence. People stood up. His mother, Mrs. Holloway, then row after row, until the whole stadium was on its feet. He walked back to his seat with his head down, suddenly shy again like the 12-year-old he used to be. But this time, the shyness wasn't about hiding. It was just who he was. And that was okay. After the ceremony, the crowd scattered across the field. Families hugged their graduates. Friends took pictures. Somewhere, a group was already chanting about a party later that night. He found Mrs. Holloway near the edge of the field. She was standing alone, watching him approach. Her eyes were red, but she was smiling. He didn't know what to say. After 5 years, after everything they had been through, words felt small. So he hugged her. Tight, the way you hug someone who saved your life. She hugged him back. Her voice was barely a whisper. She told him she almost missed him. All those months when he sat in the back of her classroom, she almost walked right past him. Almost let him slip away. He pulled back and looked at her. He was taller than her now. When did that happen? He told her the truth. He said she almost did miss him. She made a mistake. She hurt him. There was a moment when he thought about never trusting anyone again. But she didn't give up, he said. She came back. She tried again. And that made all the difference. She nodded. Wiped her eyes. She asked him what came next. Obviously. But after that, what did he want to do with this extraordinary mind of his? He thought about it. He had been asked that question 100 times by reporters, professors, admissions officers. He always gave the same safe answer about research and discovery and advancing human knowledge, but this time, he told her the real answer. He wanted to teach, not at a university, surrounded by people who already knew they were special. He wanted to teach at a middle school, a regular one like the one he had attended. He wanted to stand in front of a room full of 12-year-olds and look at every single one of them, especially the quiet ones in the back corners, because somewhere in that room, there would be a kid just like him, invisible, hiding, waiting for someone to notice, and he was going to find them. Mrs. Holloway smiled. A real smile, the kind that comes from somewhere deep inside. She told him that was the best answer she had ever heard. They stood there together in the late afternoon sun. Teacher and student, two people whose lives had been changed by a forgotten notebook and a moment of courage. And somewhere across the field, his mother watched them, holding his diploma, proud of the person her son had become. Not because of the scholarships or the publications or the prestigious university waiting for him, but because he had learned the most important lesson of all. That seeing someone Truly seeing them is the greatest gift you can ever give, and he was going to spend his whole life giving it away.